Another episode here of Getting There with Gaz, where we talk about the career journeys of athletes, coaches, business owners, media members from upstate New York. Andrew Champagne joins us here. He's got an incredible story. I can't wait to share it. So let's start at the beginning. A younger version of you, 6, 7, 8 years old. For those who don't know, where'd you grow up? What'd you want to be as a kid? And was it that same dream job you wanted when you were 18 years old?
Sure. So I grew up in the bad streets of Kingston, New York, about an hour south of Albany, about 100 miles north of New York City, exit 19 off the New York State Thruway. For those of you that have traveled to Dietz Stadium for high school regionals and states events and whatnot. But my dad he worked for IBM as his full time gig, but he did some freelance stuff as well. And one of the things that he was a sports writer for a very small local newspaper in Columbia County, New York, called the Register Star. His beat was Pine Plains High School Athletics. It's now another name that I don't even remember, but at the time it was Pine Plains High School. He would take me to football and basketball games. And I was 6, 7, 8 years old at the time. So you giving that age range is perfect. But I went, wait a minute. You're telling me you go to games for free. You cover the game, you do what you got to do. You talk to interesting people, you write about it. Sometimes they feed you and they pay you. I want to do that right there. That's what I want to do. And for better or for worse, that was the career path that I fell in love with. The idea of being in sports media. I knew what I wanted to do from a very young age. That was a blessing and a curse for me because I was able to seek out things that I really wanted to do. The problem was, as any parent can attest, it's tough to make some kids care about things like chemistry and really high level math stuff. I'd come home and I would go, I'm never going to use this. Why do I need to do this? I'm never going to need this for the things that I'm able to do. I'm sure that there were some instances where I was a model child and some instances where I was anything but, and that one falls into the latter. But I was able to do a lot of things from a really young age. My high school television station, which did the morning announcements and television show form for 10 minutes a day, was as good a place as any to get started. Did high school newspapers, did local radio, was the PA announcer for Kingston High School athletics, moved on, did that at Ithaca College, where I went to school, stayed in upstate New York for a couple of years after college, and then moved out to California in late 2013 to go work at Santa Anita Park. Been out on the West Coast now for, 8.5 years. I moved up to the Bay Area a couple of years ago, and my career's taken me a lot of really weird places, and I wouldn't trade any of it for the world. It's been a blast, man.
You've got stories, you've got advice, you've got all these different twists and turns. I cannot wait to cover this with you. So let's go a little bit back here. I want to go back to, you mentioned the early influence. Did they encourage you? Did they discourage you? Because sometimes when you have a family member or anybody who's important in your lives that is going through the day-to-day to that as their profession, sometimes they're like, I've seen the dirty side of this. You don't want to do this, or the exact opposite. So it seems as if you were encouraged to follow this path.
Yeah, I was very lucky, not just my family, but friends, mentors, teachers. A lot of people encouraged me to be able to do what I wanted to do. And I was able to surround myself with people who either believed in me or believed in my work ethic, even if my skills weren't necessarily up to snuff at any point. It was a case where I owe a lot of what I've been able to do to some of the formative influences that I had, not just my family as mentioned, but the advisors of the Kingston High School television program, John Moriarty and Andrew Schieber, the advisor for highlights, the Kingston High School newspaper, Sean O'Brien, Stu Spalgeric, who was the morning sports anchor for WKNY in Kingston. I filled in for him a couple of times. Linda Rosner was the main news anchor. She'd go on vacation during the summer. I'd fill in for her. Warren Lawrence, who I think is still the program director down there. Great guy. Just been able to run into a lot of really good people, a couple of bad ones, and we'll talk about a couple of the bad ones on this show. But anyone who's going to be successful in anything that they do, you need influences, you need mentors, and you need guides that'll be able to hand you a roadmap at some point. And I was fortunate to be able to have that.
You mentioned Ithaca was your college choice. Take us through that process. How many colleges did you apply to? Did you have some in mind? And why eventually did you decide to make yourself a bomber?
Sure. I applied to 4 different schools. I got into 3 of them. I got into Ithaca, which was one of my A schools, and I got into both of my B schools. St. John's was probably my safety school, though I will say, and I'm going to throw out a book recommendation for you. If you have not read the Big East book by Dana O'Neill, pick it up, spend an entire weekend reading it. It is absolutely worth your time. And it convinced me that if Luke Carnesecca was still the basketball coach, I would have been there because it was just such a fantastic scene there. But I got into St. John's. I got into Marist College in Poughkeepsie. The one that I didn't get into, and I was ticked off about this, I didn't get into Syracuse. I applied to Syracuse.
I'll block the posters behind me for our visual audience that he sees.
It's okay. I've got no beef with any Syracuse alums. In fact, in an odd twist, and more on this later, I wound up working with a bunch of them. But it was a case where I did really well on my SATs. I still remember these scores. Don't ask me why I went into the kitchen 5 minutes ago, but I remember my SAT scores. I had a 680, 660, and 690 for a 2030 on the SATs back when they had 3 sections. Good student. AP courses, all the extracurriculars. Newhouse admitted 12% of external applicants that year. 12%. It was brutal. Now, I wound up going to Ithaca. Ithaca and Syracuse were the 2 A schools. St. John's and Marist were the Bs. Though I will say Marist has come a long way. It was just wrong place, wrong time for me. They had just started their sports communications program. I knew it was going to be good. It just wasn't where it needed to be when I was going into college. But I went into Ithaca. I wound up majoring and double minoring in 3.5 years. And in the winter and spring of 2010, I finished my education interning with NBC Olympics in Vancouver, as you can see down there on the bottom of the screen. And I wound up working with not just Ithaca people, but Syracuse people. NBC Olympics took kids from 2 schools. Ithaca was one, Syracuse was the other. So I can't well say that I missed out on anything because I wound up getting to where I was going to go anyway.
See, those are the positives right there. You're talking about the broadcasting situation. You're talking about landing an incredible internship that takes you to Vancouver, and you're working with all these great people. So as great as things are at Ithaca, you already set me up for a tease, especially when you're a teenager in your early 20s. I feel as if this is where some of the first obstacles of your professional career are starting to be faced for you.
Little bit. There were a lot of people at Ithaca that were fantastic and still are. Jack Powers was one of my instructors, and he has just served as the interim dean for the Roy H. Park School of Communications. Wonderful guy. Pete Johans, who some of you may know for his TikTok videos with his kid. It's some of the most bizarre, warped things imaginable. And that was how he taught his advanced studio production class. But he's still there, and he's a phenomenal influence. There are people in a bunch of different departments that I genuinely love dealing with. I wound up being the PA announcer from the first week I was on campus. And there were some people who were absolutely fantastic to work with. I'm talking about Ithaca College coaches, guys like Mike Welch, who coached the football team for many, many, many years, actively went out of his way to be as helpful as humanly possible to any kid that needed anything. He sat down with us every Tuesday or Wednesday for 30, 45 minutes. And it was basically a makeshift press conference with members of the student media at Ithaca College. Nobody was forcing him to do that. He did that all on his own. There were other coaches that were just fantastic to work with. Marty Nichols, the wrestling coach, phenomenal guy. These are national championship caliber coaches that went out of their way to be as welcoming as possible. And even years later, when Ithaca came to Skidmore College for a tournament, I was writing for the Saratogian at the time. I ran into Dan Raymond, who was the women's basketball coach, and he remembered me, and we had just this wonderful, outstanding 10-minute conversation. There are good influences and there are bad influences when you're in a spot like that, because the good ones, and this is probably 90%, will recognize kids that have the work ethic, that want to be there, that want to do really cool things, and they'll help them along the way because they recognize that. Then there are about, and I don't even want to say it's 10%, in Ithaca it was lower, there are people who realize this is as far as they're going to go, and that it's a stop along the way for every kid that they work with and run into. I still remember some things. I still have some stuff in the back of my mind from certain people. And it's one of those things where sometimes the lessons you learn are what not to do and how not to treat people.
That's exactly it, man. You see the good and the bad. You make sure I'm not going to be that type of person for whatever field it is, whether it's sports broadcasting, media, sales, market, whatever it might be. At least you are aware, even being in college, okay, that's not the person I want to be. These people are too good of an influence for me in my career. So as fun as it is, and you mentioned the early exit, we'll call it the 3.5 years you get out there in the wonderful area. Eventually, they do throw you off of campus in a good way. You get to graduate. You have to find the job post college. Take us through that process of how difficult or how exciting, however you want to describe it, post job search is, post graduation. And what was that first job you landed at college?
So this is going to be an interactive multimedia experience here. If you're watching this on
Ooh.
video, you're going to see it. If not, I'm going to describe it for you. I graduated in May of 2010, which wasn't quite the height of the Great Recession, but it was close. I'm going to illustrate just how hard it was to be able to find something after college, no matter how hard I wound up working. Next to me, I have a closet, and I'm going to go like this. Bang, bang, bang. I've gotten better at that as far as realizing I need to headbutt the back of my hand as opposed to the door, but it was an experience. So I didn't plan to graduate in 3.5 years. It just sort of happened. About 2.5 years in, I realized, wait a minute, I can map this out, not take anything that isn't part of my major or minors, be done in 3.5 years. If I do the Olympics internship, great. I can do that for 1 credit and be done. If I don't get in for some reason, I don't need it, and I can check and look for a job early. So that's just how that worked out. I wound up, like everybody does, sending their resume to anybody that'll take it. I wound up having interviews with radio stations in Moberly, Missouri, Duluth, Minnesota, Charleston, West Virginia, interviewed at the University of Oregon, and pretty much everywhere. And there were times where it was rough because everybody else is doing the exact same thing. And you've got 80, 100, 120 applicants for one job. It's tough. There are a couple of stories that immediately jump out at me. That Duluth, Minnesota job, I had what I still firmly believe is one of the top 2 or 3 job interviews I've ever had in my life. It was for a sports director gig at a cluster of radio stations up there. And they were apparently going to fly me in as one of the final candidates. I got a call from Tom Raubick, who was the hiring manager at the time, and he was incredibly nice about the whole thing. I had nothing but positive things to say about him. But he calls me and he goes, Andrew, this is a horrible thing to have to tell you, but the guy that initially said no to the job in-house, sparking this nationwide search that we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 weeks, changed his mind.
Oh,
Brutal.
no.
Now, that call came midday on a weekday, and I'm home at my mom's house. And the call came about maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I had a couple of hours to stew before my mom got home from work. She asked how my day was. I mentioned it, and she goes, oh, that stinks. Nothing you can do about it. I didn't want you going there anyway. Thanks for the support, Mom. I love my mother very, very much, but that just, I remembered that in the back of my mind and it still haunts me. But no, it wound up being a case where I sent my stuff pretty much everywhere, got a variety of responses. And again, you remember the good ones, you remember the bad ones. I got one from a very high level Division I athletic program that said, to be blunt, your chances of getting hired at a Division I college are slim to none. Ouch. Yeah. So a couple months later, I got hired at Siena College, what division is that, guys?
That's D1.
That's a D1 program, right? And this was right after their basketball program had achieved national prominence, going to 3 straight NCAA tournaments, beating teams like Vanderbilt, beating teams like Ohio State. Yeah. So think I did okay there. And by the way, the University of Kansas can lose every single game for the rest of eternity. I'm finally starting to identify schools and drop names in these stories. But
let's go. I appreciate it.
There were some schools that were fantastic to me. The University of Oregon was tremendous. I applied for an internship at Villanova. They were great. It just, you remember who treated you well and who didn't. And you remember what to do and what not to do when you're in similar situations. And thankfully, I wound up in a pretty good spot. I was at Siena for 2 years, worked in their athletic communications office, and the only flaw to that was there are 18 Division I programs, there's 2 full-timers, and this kid got a little busy.
Yeah, those are some tough jobs working at Siena. I'm not talking to Siena, just the college world in general. I want to go back to the Kansas thing though, because I feel like some people who just heard that Kansas story hear it and they're like, okay, the way he felt about that email when he's 22 might not be the same way he feels when he's in his early 30s or mid 30s, because he's like, okay, I've seen things now. Like I get what I think with the real, I want to make sure we hit on this because this is important, especially for younger people who want to be broadcasters. It's not so much about the advice or what they're trying to say. It's the negative of you can't do something. I think that's more of the message that we want to take away from that, right? It's that the person being so rejective of what you're trying to do hurt far more than the truth of the statement, if you know what I'm getting at here.
Exactly. It's all in the tone, right? If he had just said, listen, you're a kid that's just graduating college. You might get to D1 at some point. Get some experience first.
Yes.
Isn't that a completely different tone than the one 100%. That I just described? It's not necessarily what you say, it's how you say it. And I know that I'm right because there's a car alarm behind me that's blaring its approval. But anyway,
you're good. I can't hear it. You're good. It might be loud on your end, but we're good on this end. Yeah.
I live right next door to a parking garage that's right behind a biker bar. It's the scene out of a sitcom, really. But anyway, it's all in the messaging. It's all in the tone. It's all in how you treat people. And as a funny little postscript, as it turned out, that was right after Kansas basketball got knocked out of the NCAA tournament by Northern Iowa. Ali Farokhmanesh hit that ridiculous three-pointer that sent Kansas home. And a couple of months later, there was a minor scandal in the Kansas athletic department that caused 9 people their jobs. It was something about reselling tickets. It was ticky-tack and it was stupid. But I saw that and went, okay, I wasn't supposed to go there anyway. This is fine.
Right. That's exactly right. And as you said, the Jayhawks can lose every single game after that email. I appreciate you.
I started to get over it.
Thank you.
Started to get over it, but it's just one of those things. There's still a label in my Gmail from when I was a kid that says first email if I get a broadcasting job. I still have that email.
I love you, man. Let's talk about Siena College because we both kind of teased it just to offer more perspective on this. These jobs, and just not picking on Siena, it's just anybody, especially in 2022, how the world has changed post-COVID of sports management, day-to-day operations. We both mentioned it's a grind and you're dealing with different teams. Kind of take us through your experience of what you were able to do day-to-day and why so many people find this as a challenging job in any part of their career.
There's any number of reasons. First of all, I should point out that there were 2 things that College Andrew decided he didn't want to do when he was in college. I didn't want to work for an athletic communications office, and I didn't want to work for a newspaper. The sports information director during my time at Ithaca treated some people well and did not treat others well. I fell into the latter category for reasons passing understanding. The newspaper thing was just because in the late 2000s, at the height of the Great Recession, newspapers were just slashing jobs left, right, and center. So naturally, my first 2 jobs out of college were the athletic communications office at Siena and as a sports writer for the Saratogian. But going to the Siena thing, I got hired in October of 2020, 2 weeks before the start of basketball season, with fall sports in their championship modes. Okay, kid, we're throwing you in the deep end. Here's a life preserver. Go catch it. See if you sink or swim. There's a lot going on. And look, there are some things in sports information that go totally unnoticed and under the radar. And those who see, say, a college sports website, who see things fall through the cracks, who take issue with how their athletes are represented or whatnot, do that job for a week, and you'll have a newfound appreciation for it. Sports information directors are some of the hardest working people out there, the ones that really throw themselves into it. I made the joke at the time that Mike Demos may as well not rent a house and just throw a cot in his office. It's that
for real, yes.
It's that kind of time commitment. And by the way, he's still there as an associate athletic director. So that tells you about his dedication to what he does. It's not easy to do. And it's a case where some of the months that seem like time off to someone that isn't necessarily familiar with the situation are the busiest ones. My busiest month was April because, yeah, basketball's done. All of the typical sports that maybe Siena is better known for are done. Know what's not done? Baseball, softball, men's lacrosse, women's lacrosse, men's golf, women's golf, water polo. I'm sure I'm missing a sport or two somewhere in there. I think tennis as well was also like, there were Aprils that I didn't get a day off in the 2 times that I was there just because there was so much going on. It's one of those things where you take a look and you realize, oh yeah, there's 18 programs with 18 different sets of games and stories and things you got to stay on top of. And heaven forbid you get one thing wrong in a softball game that's a hit or an error. Yeah, it's a lot that went on, but I got to tell you, as much as I joke, as much as I dive in, as a first job, it was almost perfect because I was able to do a lot right away. And that's probably the very first piece of advice that I would tell anybody, regardless of what field you're in. Get reps, put yourself in position to do what you want to do and find your voice. Now, I should tell you, whatever it is you want to do, whether it's broadcasting, writing, editing, whatever, some of the stuff you do is going to suck. That's fine, as long as you learn. There are college broadcasts that I have lying around somewhere that are it's cringeworthy stuff. And that's okay. If you're finding your voice, part of that is learning what doesn't work. So don't be afraid to get out there and get reps in whatever it is you want to do.
So you're doing the Santa job, you're grinding through it, it's working well, even though it's difficult, things are going well. How do we make the transition here from Siena College to the Saratogian?
Well, as it turned out, the Siena job was not a full-time job, even though it had reasonably close to full-time hours during the peak times of the season. The Saratogian was a full-time job. And as it turned out, their then horse racing person, a woman by the name of Nicole Russo, who went on to work at the Thoroughbred Times and now works at the Daily Racing Form, love her to death, fantastic human being. She moved on. And it wound up being a situation where they needed a horse racing person on their staff. I had worked for the Saratoga Special in the summer of 2011, so I had some clips. I was ready to go. I basically sent them my stuff. Initially, I was only going to clerk for them during the summer and then reevaluate what I was going to do at Siena. But then another person or two wound up leaving, and they desperately needed somebody, not just for horse racing season, but for everything. So I wound up getting hired there, and I wound up being part of a really good sports staff under a guy named Kevin Moran, who edited the Troy Record sports section and the Saratogian sports section for a very, very, very long time. Salt of the earth dude, fantastic human being, learned a lot under him, and was able to do a lot of really cool stuff in the process.
You're getting paid to work on something you're passionate about in basically your hometown market. For our audio side, the horse racing poster in the back.
I'm pointing to the press box right there.
Right. you're going to go everything, right? The paddock, the trainers, everybody. You're getting to have these connections that you probably have days where you're looking around like, I cannot believe this is my life right now. This is insane for me.
It was busy for sure in the summers, but it's tough to complain. I mean, you get to work at one of horse racing's cathedrals, a place where I grew up going to every summer. For better or for worse, by the time I was in middle school, I knew how to read a racing form. The soundtrack of my youth was Tom Durkin calling the races and Harvey Pack hosting the recap show. It was just so much fun going to work every day. And in that press box at that time, there were still full contingents of racing staffs. The New York Daily News and the New York Post would continue to send people up. You'd get people from Newsday. You'd get people from a variety of different outlets. And I was sitting behind people that had done so much in the world of horse racing media. When you're sitting behind Paul Moran, who wrote one of the great deadline-driven pieces in the history of horse racing after Go for One broke down in the Breeders' Cup, you learn. And you learn really, really quick. Thankfully, he didn't mind the loudmouth behind him asking questions and chatting him up, mainly because I think I endeared myself to him the very first day I was there, because this was 2012. Not everywhere in horse racing was HD yet. And that included Finger Lakes, which Naira was showing on one of the weekdays because there was nothing else to show. So Paul and John Preachy were looking at a television going, why isn't any of this in HD? Why aren't there HD channels? Yada, 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 yada. Well, I was a television and radio major at Ithaca College. So I knew about file compression and delivery stuff. I'm like, guys, I can answer that. And I was able to give them an answer in about 30 seconds. And at that point, they basically just said, okay, we can tolerate this kid. He's fine. But they had, along with a couple of other people, Tom Amello, Nick Kling, Will Springstead, all of them had about 1,000 chances to tell a brash, loudmouth kid by comparison to shut up. And they never did. And I will always respect them for that.
So you listening right now, you might hear the story of Andrew Champagne, or you may not be familiar with his work and think, okay, this is the end of the story. Like the New York guy got the New York thing. We're airing this in Belmont week. Like this is the end. He's going to ask about the best advice you can have. This is the end of the. No, like share as much as you want, both professionally and personally, however you want to take this next journey here on this road. Let's get into California, TVG. I'll leave this open to you to take this, whatever path you want to about this change from the Saratogian to heading out west.
Sure. So, for better or for worse, a number of relationships that I had were not in good places in the summer and fall of 2013, both personally and professionally. I loved my job at the Saratogian. I loved what I was able to do, but there sometimes becomes a spider sense of, okay, I'm in journalism. Something's going to happen here. And it's a case where the 4 words any journalist hears more than any other from the people above them have become do more with less. So my mindset was, and always was get out when it's your decision and not theirs. I wound up the day after the 2013 meet ended, taking a train down to New York City, where I met with Phil Kubel, who at that time was the vice president of digital media for the Stronach Group. He was in New York City for the day. I met with him, and he wound up flying me out to Santa Anita for a job potentially with HRTV's digital media arm. And I wound up being an associate producer with them for about a year and a half. My dad and I drove cross country from Clifton Park, New York, all the way to Pasadena, California. The third day, we hit the first snow of the season in Vail, Colorado. If you have never driven on a highway in Colorado, pro tip, there's no lights on the highways. So if you're going to do that drive, do it during the day and preferably not during a snowstorm. I'm driving my Chevy Impala down some of the steepest peaks in the Rockies. My dad is grabbing the oh shit bar in the front seat. I'm going about 15 miles an hour so that we don't spin out. 3 hours and 100 miles later, we stop at a McDonald's. I forget where it was, but I just remember flipping him the keys and kissing the most sanitary part of the ground I could find. However, we ended the day in Las Vegas. The next day, I was home in Pasadena. I've been in California ever since. I worked for HRTV for about a year and a half, was able to do so much cool stuff for a guy that was not hired to be anything but an associate producer of digital media. I was supposed to be one of the guys that's migrating digital content over to what was then hrtv.com. Jeff Siegel and Aaron Veracruz saw something in me. I was able to help out with some of their over-the-top broadcasts that they did, which sort of served as the basis for a lot of things people wound up doing moving forward. A lot of the auxiliary broadcasts that you see on things like the Watch TVG app, or you see things on First Bet, this was the beta version of that, basically. I've still got some DVDs that I have of some of my hits there. It was such a good learning experience to be able to learn from people that were in a position to doing some of the things I wanted to do. And then we start hearing things in early 2015 after Churchill Downs had dissolved their 50% ownership in HRTV. We start hearing things about TVG. TVG, of course, winds up buying HRTV. To their credit, they absorbed probably about half of the HRTV workforce, which was way more than any of us thought was going to happen. We basically figured that when they were talking to all of us, it was more so as a favor. We thought, oh, maybe they'll take 5 or 10 of us. They'll take a couple on-air anchors. They'll take a couple of people behind the scenes, and that'll be it. They wound up hiring 30, 35 of us, and we wound up going to work for TVG. Was there for 2 years. Wound up running into a situation where I sort of realized I hit my ceiling there, for lack of a better term. But still, the first 2 years that I was at TVG were some of the most rewarding years of my career because I was put in a position right away to where I was trusted to do what I knew how to do and allowed to do it with minimal interference. The guys that allowed me to do that were Bhavesh Patel and Stephen Kennelly, among others. People I still count as friends and mentors to this day. A lot of people over at TVG that I admire very, very much were part of a really, really good marketing department there. It was fun. It was fun going to work, even Wednesday through Sunday, even not having weekend days. You get used to running grocery errands on Mondays. The bad news is you're doing, that stuff on a Monday. The good news is you go at 12:30, ain't nobody around. It's quick.
That's exactly right. So you're at TVG now. It is just production behind the scenes stuff. Are we starting to see more of you potentially on the air offering handicapping strategies, picks? Do we see a mix between that at this point at TVG, or does that come later?
A little. I wound up doing a lot of online stuff. I sort of assumed the role of the main social media person that was running TVG's social media outlets. For a little bit, it was myself and another holdover from the HRTV days. She left around the 2015 Breeders' Cup, which was also when they decided to transition HRTV to TVG2, which meant HRTV.com needed to become TVG2.com. So there were several days during October of 2015 where I was the first person in the door at the Howard Hughes Center, and I was the last person leaving. I saw the sun go up on one side and come down on the other, and I got to tell you, that first paycheck in the month of November, really, really nice. But it wound up being a situation where, again, I unknowingly was one of the first people to do something that a lot of people wound up doing a couple of years later. There was a spare room on the first floor of the TVG studios that wasn't being used by anybody. So I would wind up going in there. There was a camera, there was a switcher type thing, and there was a video editing tool. And I would go in and I would tape hits for social media and I'd send those out. And I'd wind up also putting some tickets out on social media, and those wound up doing okay. And just having the freedom to be able to do that stuff was really, really cool. And oh, by the way, 4 years after that, when the pandemic hits, guess what everybody else has to do? Exact same things I did. There was at least one person at TVG, and I still don't know who this was. If you're out there, by all means, tell me. I'm not mad at you. I just want to know. They called the TVG2 studio initially the Handy Capsule because it was this little sawed-off room in a back corner, was sort of an afterthought. They called my room the Wacky Capsule, and I just thought it was funny that 4 years later, everybody has wacky capsules of their very own.
The Wacky Capsule, aka the home studio, right?
I'm
Things
not
start to
mad.
change, right?
I'm not mad. I just want to know who did it.
It's like some people who work a second job. At some point, it became a side hustle. Side hustle sounds a lot better than second job. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I asked about the handicapping thing because some people are wondering how in the world, how can you do this? Like, how are you so good at this, Andrew Champagne? I see the Twitter profile, 5-time champion at Saratoga, man. I don't want you to give away all your strategies, but I guess take us through like when you started to realize, looking down at your picks, like, yo, I'm killing this right now. Like, I can do this for a living, making this money like I'm doing, man.
You're very, very kind. Unfortunately, the main secret that I have is when you're young, don't have a life. When I was a kid, I read a lot. The best book my dad ever gave me was books. And ultimately, whatever I got my hands on, I wanted to be able to understand. And that included the daily racing form. It was a case where, again, as I mentioned earlier, by the time I was in middle school, I knew that a fifth of a second represented a length in the past performances. And I was able to at least have a shred of an idea as far as, okay, how is this race likely to be run and who's likely to run the race necessary in order to win it? Everybody remembers their first semi-big score, right? I remember mine. It was in the Whitney Handicap one year. Todd Pletcher had a sprinter stretching out by the name of Left Bank, and Left Bank winds up winning. The score, though, came the race after. Richard Migliori piloted a stakes caliber filly by the name of River Rush to win the finale at odds of 8-1. That late double paid $60, which to a 12 and 13-year-old kid, like, That's good money.
Yeah.
That's a really nice score, right?
Right.
So I'm riding high going home. I'm like, okay, maybe I can have some element of how to do this. And it's not like I was heavily involved in horse racing in high school and college. I'd go to Saratoga though. I'd read the form. I'd come up with stuff. And ultimately it wound up being a case where I knew enough to where in 2011, I was able to latch on with the Clancys for a summer at the Saratoga Special. Cannot speak highly enough of Joe and Sean Clancy, by the way. I know the tradition is for the Pink Sheet to be here and the Saratoga Special to be here and go, Not me. Love Joe, love Sean, good people, really good reporters, just absolutely outstanding stuff. Learned a lot that summer. And it got to where when I got hired on at the Saratogian, I was the main on-track guy for them, and I did a lot of blogging from the track, engaging with people and going on social media and whatnot. In 2013, a spot came open in the pick box, and Barb Lombardo, my second line boss, the former managing editor, wasn't sure how she was going to fill it. I popped in and go, I want it. She said, okay. So I wound up getting it. A couple of years later, Nick Kling, who one of the best to ever do it. I mean this. He had a full year once where he had a positive ROI in print. You think that's easy? Try it sometime. He wound up retiring, and ultimately they needed somebody to step in because I left on really good terms and was still doing freelance stuff in the summer. Even when I was with HRTV and TVG, I would be doing stuff with the Saratogian, and whoever my employer was would have a really small ad next to my mug. So it wound up working out really well for everybody. And ultimately, the best handicapping strategy I have is experience. Throw yourself into one particular track or one particular circuit. If you try to spread your time around at 10 or 11 different tracks, it's not going to go well. Figure out a track or a surface or a circuit that works for you. Focus on that, really drill down and own it. I got to tell you, I'm a New York guy. People think that being a New York guy, you're going to be really good at all three New York tracks. Guys, I hate Belmont. I absolutely hate it. That turf course is pavement. They don't do two-turn turf races nearly as much as Saratoga does, but that opens up a window of opportunity. If you're looking at two-turn races at Saratoga with a bunch of horses coming up from Belmont, I don't want to say toss the Belmont races because, look, those are sometimes the only races the horses run in a year. Look for two-turn turf form. If you spot horses that are just way better going two turns than one, you're ultimately going to find a little bit of value with those horses I've found. And if they're lone speed going those two turns, that's when you send it in.
I like that. Some people just wrote that down. They're going to hit the rewind button here on the podcast. Like, hey, let me write that down for July. Let me write that down for August. You've gone through this probably before a lot of other people have, because we're talking here in June of 2022. Over the last 3 years, we've seen the expansion of legalized sports wagering. Whether it's over-unders, pick-ems, money lines, like now it's in the talk. It was before, like in the background. And I bring this up because for you, you've been facing this on social media because of what you do for a profession where now people might get a pick wrong and they'll get the nasty message. Hell, you've probably been doing this for a decade of, oh, you missed another try, you missed an exotic, you missed a, like, it's probably like, okay, I know I'm going to get it. You feel like, here's my fear, right? Like you're going to continue to make picks and you're not going to like it because you know you're going to get trashed on social media. It doesn't feel like that because you continue to pound out the content, but I feel like you've seen a change, hopefully, for the positive, negative when it comes to your picks online.
There's a great saying that I was in attendance for by the legendary guitarist Stephen Stills. Crosby, Stills, and Nash wheel into a song. Stills misses a note. The entire band stops playing, and everyone's looking at him. And Stills looks around and goes into the microphone and says, when I do really great stuff, no one notices. I miss one note, and they stop the damn song. That's the plight of the handicapper on social media right now. And it might sound like I'm complaining. I'm not. It's just that's social media in a nutshell. Social media at its best is an absolutely wonderful place where people can come together and exchange ideas. Over the past 5 or 6 years, for a number of different reasons, not the one you're probably thinking about, a number of different reasons, that's changed. And it's a case where I owe a lot of my career and my standing to social media. My website, andrewchampagne.com, had all of the Pink Sheet stuff on it from day to day. If you're not in Saratoga, you can go to my website. You can see all of my stuff that I'm putting out there. The Saratogian graciously allows me to do that. I'm very, very thankful for that. With no promotion other than social media and the occasional nod in print, I got 22,000 hits last summer on this little
Woohoo!
dinky
Let's
website
go.
that just had text on it. It's not like I was throwing a whole bunch of video stuff or anything flashy on it. It was just content that I was churning out on top of my regular 40-hour-a-week job, which at that time was for a nonprofit in the homeless space up in Northern California. But I feel equipped to answer this a little bit because over the past 5 months, I've taken on a new job that's as close to a dream job as I'm going to get. I'm a content manager for Catena Media, an affiliate marketing company in the gambling space. And I'm running websites for certain states: California, Florida, Maryland, Massachusetts, Ohio, and Texas. And being able to see the developments in each of these states where sports betting is coming. It's not if, it's when. They just need to figure out the money part of it, right? And ultimately, that's caused the shift. Once PASPA got repealed and once states realized, oh my God, there's money to be made here, all of a sudden everything changed. And you only need to watch ESPN News for 5 minutes to be able to see it, because that used to be just someplace where ESPN would throw away programming. They'd occasionally put games there when there was an overrun of a prior game. You look there, a third of the screen is taken up with betting information. And ESPN doesn't have a sports book. ESPN is putting this stuff up. It's a company owned by Disney. If ESPN's doing that, try to imagine what TVG is going to look like in 10 years. It's coming. And ultimately, I think a lot is going to change along with that, both in the information that we see and how we deal with it.
Cantena Media. We've talked about horse racing. We talked about thoroughbreds. There's to be fans of this that love all that work. Now that you're doing this day to day and you're seeing this evolution, have you thought about expanding into sports, baseball, football, basketball, the more traditional ones of offering picks there? Do you stay in the lane? Because this is now a little conflicting for me, because I'm like, man, he's got all these scoops. He knows what's going on. I need some more picks throughout when it's not racing season for me.
So I did do NFL picks a couple of years ago on Twitter. I just took 4 games every week, and I wound up doing okay. I wound up hitting it at even 60% with them. I didn't do bad. The season after that, not so much. I hit a rough patch mid-season and then just ultimately wound up doing some other stuff in 2021. But is it something that I could see people doing? Yeah. Is it something that I know people are doing because rather than dive into the racing form looking for one horse and taking 2 hours, it's a lot easier to say, I want the Chiefs? And I got to tell you, horse racing, be prepared. Better be prepared to answer that question. Not 5 years from now. Now, figure it out. There's reason to believe you can do it, but it's pressing for sure. And as far as creating that type of content, sure. But if you're getting into that field, the biggest advice that I can give you, I'm not telling you not to do this. Do something to where people can differentiate you from all of the noise that is out there, because there are a lot of really bad content creators in the gambling space. Now, I'm not talking picks. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about portraying the image that you want, portraying the image of somebody that's credible that you want to come back to, being able to create an atmosphere where you're talking with people, not at them. Basic human stuff. Just be mindful of that.
Not to make you and I feel old, but I think we both remember the days when this was on a bunch of different media outlets where you'd be like, well, call Vinny the Fish's picks on this hotline, and you got to pay $100 for it. And like, you can't miss it. And then that would be the commercial and be like, who the hell, what? That would be like how these touts used to like hype themselves up. And then,
yeah.
Right. Like, well, you and I remember this, and like younger people who are getting into this for the first time, they have no idea that these horrible content creators have been around for 30 years. The problem is, they have a bigger avenue and a bigger platform, and they can hit more people than they've ever hit before. But in comparison to traditional media, it's scary. Like, I get nervous for some people who can't flush that out at times.
Yeah. And the other piece of advice that I'll have is just whatever you see, consider the source and make sure you're right. There were a lot of people that knocked Jimmy the Greek because way back in Super Bowl III, he made the Colts 18 or 19-point favorites over the Jets. And of course, the Jets won. Joe Namath guaranteed it. They controlled the ball, whatever. People were killing Jimmy the Greek for this. But Jimmy the Greek's job was not to accurately predict the outcome of the game. His job, setting the line, was to ensure that an equal amount of money went to each side. And by the way, to those of you that are complaining about morning lines out there, the morning line is not an indication of who the morning line handicapper thinks will win. It's who the morning line handicapper thinks the public will bet. Learn those subtle differences. You'll be way better off.
You've offered so much great advice on this. I do want to get you out with the best advice. One large one. I got to ask this, though. I know the visual doesn't say this on our visual side here, the graphic, I should say. Don't you have like a connection with Sal Paolantonio? Didn't you meet him early in your career? I wanted to make sure I got that story out there because I know he's got some Capital Region connections, I believe, in Clifton Park. What was your connection with Sal Paolantonio early in your career?
Sal's a good guy. He had connections at Ithaca too, because all three of his daughters wound up going to Ithaca College. I went with his youngest, Sarah, who did a lot of radio work with WICB. She was more so in the DJ side rather than the news and sports side. So I didn't see her too much, but I knew she was there. She knew who I was, whatever. And he would come by and he would do a couple of things every year for people that were interested and people that had caught his attention. And I wound up being lucky enough to be one of them. And I'll tell this story from when I was a senior at Ithaca. It was myself and a guy named Josh Getzoff doing play-by-play for Ithaca College football. And if any hockey fans out there think, gee, that name sounds familiar, he's the play-by-play guy now for a little organization called the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's got a sock drawer full of Stanley Cup rings. I watch horses turn left. It's a George Michael, Andy Ridgely type of situation. But Sal Pal is there, and Butterfield Stadium, this old little 10,000 seat capacity stadium on the campus of Ithaca looking out over Lake Cayuga, has a really tiny press box. He's holding court with the TV guys, the radio guys, the newspaper guys, and he's just being incredibly accessible, just a good dude. All of a sudden, we hear from behind us this little murmuring, and it's the then sports information director yelling, "Move!" And he storms out of the room. I got more stories about him that I'll tell at a later date. Out of respect, I'm not going to share them now. But going back to Sal Pal, he sat down with everybody for a couple of minutes during the game. Radio got 5 minutes. TV got 5 minutes. The newspaper people got 5 minutes, whatever. Nice guy. Just absolutely loved being there, loved talking shop with people. And I wound up ultimately getting an internship with a radio station in Levittown, Pennsylvania, just over the Pennsylvania-New Jersey border, and wound up working for a guy by the name of Merrill Reese, who was a play-by-play guy, of course, for the Philadelphia Eagles. Another really good guy. Was able to do some cool stuff for them, especially because a local team that year made regional play of the Little League World Series. The Little League World Series was played on a regional level in Bristol, Connecticut. Now, that's a 5-hour drive for people that are in Levittown, Pennsylvania. For yours truly, based in upstate New York, it was about an hour and a half. So guess who got the play-by-play assignment for that? How you doing?
That's right.
Wound up being pretty cool. A couple of those kids, actually, I looked a couple of years ago, wound up playing college ball. So they wound up being pretty good. They were second that year behind a team from Toms River, New Jersey, who I think has made every single Little League World Series since the beginning of time. But got to do a lot of really cool stuff there. Grateful to Sal for that. He did a lot of things for me and for a lot of people out there that he didn't necessarily have to do.
Happy to hear that story, having people pass on to the next generation and work with the young people. That's how we're going to close this. I know you've offered a lot of advice throughout this show. I appreciate it. But to close it out, the best advice of someone, whether it's Ithaca, whether it's Kingston, wherever it might be, maybe somebody's looking to intern at TVG, whatever their situation is, they're hoping to do this. What's the best advice you can offer somebody who wants to get where you are in your career right now?
I've got to cheat and offer a couple. Is that okay?
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay. The first one is just on a fundamental level. If it feels wrong, it is. Trust your gut more than anything else. A lot of times your gut is going to be dead on the money right. A very good friend of mine, I'm not going to get too far into this, but about 4 or 6 months ago, got approached for a whole bunch of money. And he was from a fairly big company. He wound up turning it down because his gut told him it was too good to be true. Turned out it was. Turned out that that company would wind up hitting a little bit of a speed bump a couple months after that. Nothing fatal, but enough to where he's like, okay, yeah, made the right move, dodged a bullet there. As far as other stuff, don't let someone tell you you can't do something. Again, this goes back to what I learned talking to the person at Kansas University, right? It's one of those things where I'm wired in a really strange way. Okay. I grew up watching professional wrestling, and I blame a lot of it on that. If someone tells me I can't do something, or that I suck, or that I'm terrible, whatever, I get a chip on my shoulder. When I left TVG, it was for a number of different reasons. That following summer, I led everybody across all media in winners at Saratoga with 128 wins. This past summer in 2021, I did it again with 142. Don't tell me I can't do something. Just don't do it. It's not a good idea. And that really is more of a lesson in being able to take feedback that's given to you and spin it positively. I'm not trying to tell you to turn into Michael Jordan and take every little thing personally and create these warped perceptions of everybody else in reality. But if you're motivated and you know you can do it, a lot of times the people that are spouting that advice were in your shoes and either didn't do it or failed themselves and are trying to bring you down to their level rather than raising you to where you want to be. So those two are probably the biggest ones. As far as horse racing handicapping analysis goes, never, ever, 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 ever bet on an offspring of Zenyatta first time out.
He is Andrew Champagne. Andrew, thank you so much for doing this, man. I know it's a busy time for you. I know there's some big races on the way. The summer's just around the corner. Thank you so much for offering up this time. I can't wait to stay connected with you throughout the summer coming up, following your work as well. On our audio and visual side, we're going to have some links to Andrew's websites and all his good stuff, his social media and stuff below, so you can follow it as well. Be nice to him on social media when you win and you lose. That's all we'll ask. Andrew, appreciate the time, man. Looking forward to staying in touch for the future.
Thanks so much, guys. This was a lot of fun.